Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Michael Zuber's channel. He is still on vacation, so we are here today to fill in for him. I'm Casey, Brick by Brick Wealth, and we're here with the amazing Anna Kelly. And today I want to talk about something that I'm always getting questioned about, renting versus buying. So which is cheaper? Which is cheaper, renting or buying? Anna Kelly, what's your take?
Well, right now, I know for sure that in most markets, renting is definitely cheaper than buying. That's not always been the case. And so, depending on what's going on in the economy and rates, a couple years ago, it was definitely cheaper in certain situations to buy rather than rent because interest rates were so low. But now, with prices high and interest rates high, it's really expensive for people to buy a home right now. And so, again, renting is right now cheaper than it is to buy in most markets.
I read an article and I'm looking at it now. Well, I copy and pasted. And a couple key points I thought were interesting it says renters will spend an average of $1.26 million over the course of 30 years, while homeowners will spend 1.3 million. And I thought this was amazingly interesting, although not surprising. In at least 7 major cities in California, long-term renting is cheaper than owning a home. Renters save on average $900,000 over a 30-year period. Now, from what I gathered, it seems they're just taking into consideration mortgage payments versus rent payments. And there's a lot that goes into owning or renting a home besides just the payment that you make. So for
Yes.
renting a home, right, you have somebody else doing a lot of the anticipated maintenance. You have somebody else making the repairs. And owning a home, you're responsible for all of that. You're responsible for fixing your leaky toilet. You're responsible for putting up a roof. You're responsible for, kitchen upgrades and things like that. So there's definitely more to the story than just the actual rent price and the actual mortgage price.
Yes, for sure. And I think the other thing that doesn't go into account is the equity that you build by owning a home. Because the reality is, if you're looking over 30 years, you're paying down equity on something you now own. And if it's in California, it could be a $500,000, $1 million home that you now own. That's net worth that you have when you do own. And so you can tap that equity and make many, many investments for that. So let's just say we're talking about 1.2 to $1.3 million. If you've rented, all that money is spent and it's done and you don't own anything, right? So you walk away and, oh no, I don't have anything. If you've bought and you pay that $1.3 million, let's just say 300,000 of that was repairs. That's like a little over about 30% of that 1.3 million. You have $1 million probably that you put into or close. I mean, you have taxes and insurance built into your mortgage payment. But let's just even say $750,000 of that was the actual equity that you paid down on that home. Now you've got $750,000, Casey, that you can go tap. And in today's market, you can equate that to buying, maybe $3.5 million in property with 20% down, something like that. So you can create so much cash flow and income from other investments by tapping your equity. And that's the big advantage of really home ownership that looking at apples to apples, which is cheaper, doesn't really take into account, which I think is huge. And so if you're just saying, what's my cost of living? In many markets, it might be actually cheaper to rent. And there's a lot of people that are choosing to forego home ownership because of that. But I think that loses the importance of equity, what the possibilities are with that equity, the ability to then, put a tenant in it if you want to, and then move somewhere else down the road, and the tax benefits that come with home ownership as well.
A lot of people, so I help a lot of students with their first rental property, right? And it's their first investment ever. And a lot of them, many of them, use the equity from their home. They get a HELOC, and I love the fixed rate HELOCs. Okay, I'm not a big fan of the adjustables because you never know. But they'll use
Yes.
their HELOC and pull that out and use that as a down payment to get started. A lot of other people will live paycheck to paycheck until retirement. And they're like, oh, thank goodness I have my house. Thank goodness I have
Yes.
equity in my home. That was my parents. They spent a lot of their money, most of it.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
luckily, they had a California house and they were able to sell it. And they moved to Mexico, as many of you guys that are watching know. And they used the cash that they had saved from their equity, and they were able to buy something and retire and not have to work. I think, okay, well, if you're renting for life and you're still living paycheck to paycheck, what's going to happen when you retire? You're still going to have to pay for rent. And then by the time you're at retirement age, your rent's no longer, $3,000 a month. It's going to be way high in, many years to come. Who knows? I mean, it's ridiculous now, the California rents. One of my friends rents for 5,000 a month, another one for like $4,500 a month. This is Southern California, and they have regular jobs. So it's so hard to save any money when all of it's going to somebody else. At least when you're
Yes.
paying the mortgage payment, yes, it's going to the lender, but it's a fixed rate, right? You're building equity in your home, and you're able to save a lot more money that way. And you don't have to do big repairs in your house. You don't have to do big upgrades and remodel your kitchen and all those things. You can, we all have seen, all of us investors have seen 1970s houses today that are original, in good shape. And guess what? Those houses are still way more than when they purchased them in 1970. So as long as you take care of your property and you own it, you don't have to spend buku bucks doing upgrades. You can be building equity along the way. And a lot of times that saves a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so many good points there. I know my mom and my dad, my stepmom, they're in their early 70s now as well. And my mom rented for a really long time, pretty much my whole life. And I actually was able to buy her a house at the beginning of this year. But that was, such a blessing and something I'd wanted to do for a long time. But I looked at my mom, who's in her 70s, who's a full-time caretaker of her husband who had a stroke, and my two nephews who have autism that she's adopted. And so, she is basically living on Social Security, and then disability, for her husband. And her rent payments were, taking up more, almost half of what she brings in every single month. And, they weren't even taking that good care of the property. And so it was just sad to realize she's paid rent for all these years and she has nothing to show for it. Right. So we were able to, thankful to all the rental property that I've accumulated over the years, I was able to sell some property and buy her a home. But if she had been able to have the benefit of home ownership earlier on, she would have had, lots of equity by now in her home. And so I think that's a really good point, Casey, that I don't think a lot of people really think about. If you're young or you're a millennial and you're thinking about making this decision, you're really thinking, in a couple year time frame. And the reality is, if it's a short-term move that you're going to make, if you're not going to live somewhere, and I haven't done the math recently, I know the math is way different today than it was a few years ago when I looked at this, but essentially, if you are not going to live in a house for at least 5 years, and now it might be closer to 6 or 7, then the cost of your down payment, your closing costs, and the interest that you're paying, because you're paying way more interest than principal in the early years before it starts to snowball and you start to, pay down less interest and more principal. If you're not going to stay put in an area for sure for at least 5 years, you will be in the negative if you try to sell most homes. In most economies where on an inflation adjusted basis, and Michael and I did the spreadsheet back to like the 1970-ish, on an inflation adjusted basis with big booms in the economy and big busts in the economy and ups and downs in values, historically from the beginning of that time over about a 50-year period, Casey, we've seen 1% inflation adjusted appreciation in the average home in the United States. And so, if your home value goes up 5% in 5 years, that's probably just covering your closing cost. So if you're young, or even, you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s, and you say, hey, I'm going to live somewhere, but I only see myself here for 3, 4, 5 years, it's probably wiser to rent, because again, you don't have any maintenance and repairs that you're having to handle during that time. You don't have to worry about if taxes or insurance. If taxes and insurance do go up, you take that hit as a homeowner. You don't necessarily as a renter, although sometimes it's passed through. But it could be very smart for you to choose to rent. And we did the same thing because of that equation. When we first moved to Pennsylvania, we lived with my in-laws for a year while we had built my husband's practice, and then we house hacked. We bought a 4-unit property, and then when we outgrew that, we basically went into a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 little kiddos, a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old, and I was pregnant with my 3rd baby during the great financial crisis. And we were like, we're going to have to look for something a little bit bigger. And we thought about buying at that time, and the economy wasn't doing really well, but we knew whatever we can afford today, which wasn't much because I had lost most of my 401k. we wouldn't want to stay in more than probably 2 or 3 years and then hopefully be able to buy. So we rented a much nicer home than what we could have afforded to buy. And we rented for 3 years, Casey. And my rent, I think, was 1,300 a month for a big 5-bedroom house, beautiful yard. To own that house with taxes and insurance back then would have been over $2,000 a month. And so, we were wiser to just save that money, save the down payment costs, rent for a few years, and we bought rental property while we were renting a house rather than buying our own house and, upgrading to something that really wasn't going to benefit us. So we took a really long time where we made that decision, and we calculated out the difference and realized, because we don't want to stay here for 5 years, it is much better to rent. And we were able to grow our wealth and our income by keeping a lower rent payment in a really nice property that allowed us to then accumulate a bigger down payment for when we did ultimately decide to buy.
A lot of people do that. They live in high cost areas on the east. Usually it's the east or west coast is what I'm finding. Middle America is semi affordable to buy. There's high income earners on the coast. Prices to home prices are high, and it is much cheaper to rent. And so those people will buy homes out of state and buy them as rentals and start building their portfolio that way with properties, in the 100 to $400,000 range, and multifamily, small multifamily around the 2 to 400, and single family, even less than 100, you can get some okay houses up to 200,000. And it's like when they hear you can buy an out of state property for $170,000 in cash flow, and I'm like, yes. We're like, where? Because out here where we are, it's ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
It's like $1 million for a shack. And even for young people who each might make $200,000 a year at their job, which is really good money, but not amazingly for the West Coast, they're like, we're never going to be able to afford these $2 million houses that are out here. So, but
Yeah.
they have a really good income and could buy a lot of houses in Middle America. So,
Absolutely. And I think I was trying to count, but I think we had 20 units before we bought our own home, because it just made
okay,
so much more sense to,
yeah.
put a small down payment. We figured out some owner financing, we did some house hacking, and we were able to get our payments enough where we had so much cash flow coming in, and the cash flow covered our rent and then some. So it's another way to think about house hacking. We think, okay, you have to move in the unit. But
Mhm.
sometimes, to your point, if it's a high cost area where buying that 4 unit is going to be really expensive, you might not want to house hack that. But you can kind of house hack by buying other properties elsewhere that bring in enough rental income that it covers the cost of your mortgage, so you're still living for free. And so I think that's a really wise first move, especially like you said, for investors who are just getting started that don't have big families. They really don't need a big house. Rent a really nice apartment and then go buy rental property to help you to pay for it. And if you use that mentality to kind of think of your home as not just the place that you live and there's a cost of living, but you think about, how can I use the place that I live to help me increase my income and my net worth? You can do that either by living in the house and growing the equity, like you said, or renting a place and then buying other things that are going to go up in equity and other things that are going to create that cash flow to allow you to move. And not just for first-time homeowners, but I know a lot of people, actually very, very wealthy, high net worth individuals. This is kind of a new trend. They're selling their homes and then they're choosing to rent, and they're living in different places throughout the year that are less expensive, and taking all the equity that they have to invest in passive things and then renting properties that makes their lifestyle able to travel. So you can do that in your 20s and your 40s. I know a lot of very wealthy people that do it in their 60s and their 70s. And so, renting really is for those that want the options to be able to be flexible with where they live. They can change their mind at any time. They're not kind of stuck in having to live in one area for very long, and they're finding other ways to grow their income and grow their net worth. So I very much encourage people to, people that have come to me that are young, they're like, we want to buy our house, and they've wanted to buy over the last two years, and I've looked at their payment and said, no way. The house that you're looking to buy, to your point, the only thing you can afford when you're starting out is like a 1950, 60, 70 house. And it's going to need, they think, oh, we can fix this up for $10,000. I'm like, sweetie, this house is going to cost you $50,000 to fix up just to make it decent where you don't have $10,000 repair years or bills every
Right.
year. And it's not where you're going to want to live for more than 2 or 3 years because the kiddos are going to come and all kinds of stuff. So I've encouraged them not to buy, but rather to rent for a while to save up their money and then look to buy an investment property that they can house hack.
One more thing that I want to mention, and I know we're, bringing it home to which is cheaper, renting or buying. Sometimes it's not always about what's cheaper. It's not always about, where am I going to save the most money? Because this is our life. We spend, besides going to work, if you do go to work nowadays, you're going to spend maybe 100% of your time at home, besides going on vacations or going to the store, whatever. So quality of life is important. And I know from seeing hundreds, I don't know, probably 1,000 or more rental properties, the quality of the rentals is not the quality of homeowners' homes. And when you're renting a home, property managers and landlords, they're not doing the extra. They're not upgrading your kitchen to upgrade. They're only going to fix things when they're broken, when they have to be fixed, because rental properties are supposed to be a moneymaker. I mean, it's not a charity. Nobody would do it for free. So they need to make money. So you have to keep costs down, do the necessary repairs, make it nice, comfortable, decent, but we don't need to go extravagant. That means if the front door is kind of old, but it works, it's going to stay there. You're not going to upgrade your front door unless it needs it. You're not going to upgrade your garage door in case it needs it. You're not going to redo the kitchen in case you need to do it. And so when you're renting, sometimes you're not getting like the best quality of, repairs. You're not going to get the quality craftsman and workmanship. You're going to get cheap labor to do your paint jobs, right? They're not going to scrape off all the little globs along the baseboards. They're just going to paint over the old ones. They're not going to care about paint drips and all those things. They're going to paint around the hinges on the door. They're not going to take the hinges off before painting. So sometimes it's those little things, and you can really tell the difference when you walk into a rental property versus the next door neighbor owns their home. It's going to look completely different. And so for me, quality of life is a little bit more important than what is cheaper. And I would like to live a decent quality of life and be happy with where I live, and choose to make upgrades to make my place better, and not be like, well, I'm not going to do that because it's not my house.
Right, right. That's a very good point. And the other thing is, if you want a higher quality life, you're just going to have to pay higher rent, and then that becomes the equation. I own a lot of apartment buildings as well as single family homes, and we have Class A brand new stuff, and we have stuff that's I would call Class B. Maybe they're 10 or 15 years old. When we go in and we buy those properties, we're going to upgrade them quite nicely, but you're going to pay a premium of several $100s because we have to recoup our cost, and it could cost
Mhm.
us $10,000 to go in and update a unit. Well, we're going to have to pass that through in our rents and try to recuperate that, hopefully within about a 3-year period. So that's going to make your rent go up, probably $300 a month or something like that. And so, it's always a trade-off. And I always try to tell people, one of the really just a very good discipline is being able to be patient, to show patience, and being able to say, what do I really want and what's worth it to me to pay extra for, and what do I have to sacrifice in order to get that? And so sometimes it's worth it to get those upgrades. But I can tell you sometimes we do apartments, for example, that have really good quality. We really focus on quality as well, but it's not quite the same quality as you would have when you move in. And so some of the things might be, you love a beautiful type of granite or quartz countertop. Well, I'm still going to put granite in my apartment, but it's not going to be the same type of granite. I'm still going to put nice white shaker cabinets in an apartment if that's what the area likes, but it's not going to be the same quality of wood as something that it is in a home. And so sometimes you can get the look of quality and wealth without the expense of doing that. And so you should kind of shop around. But I would say, if you can be patient early on, if you don't have really the luxury of paying $300 a month because you want something really high quality, then be real with yourself about what is really worth it and what is not. Could you live in something that's pretty nice, but not quite what you want for a couple of years to save money so that you can invest and then be able to afford that upgrade? So it's all about, choices. And I think sometimes renting gives you the options to be able to change your mind as life shifts, especially if you're younger, because when you're younger, what you want and think you need when you're single versus when you first get married versus when you have kids, it's totally different. Your priorities change so much because kids are really expensive and they change your idea of what you need to have and what you want to have. So, you know, optionality, especially if you think you might change jobs, or maybe you have two spouses and their careers or could take them to different cities. Rent gives you that optionality, so that you can be flexible with as your needs and your wants change. Where once you own that home, you're going to put a lot more money into that home than you think, and it's going to become a lot more expensive to own if you're not going to
Yeah.
stay put.
This house we bought it 10, we've been here 10 years, and it was a true 1970s. I mean, avocado green tile. They had updated the kitchen in the early 2000s, but it was still the same cabinets from the 50s or so. I think the house was in the
Uh,
70s. From the 70s, just painted them white, and we had a blue laminate countertop, wallpaper. I mean, so we bought that, and we it up. We're still doing stuff. We just put in new
yeah.
interior doors, so they were the flat panel, and it's just money, 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 to fix a house up.
Yes.
And the Golden Gate Bridge, when you have kids, as soon as you finish painting or whatever, you got to start all back over again. They got crayons on the walls and all that. So there's
Absolutely. And that's,
definitely a lot of
with
money into
with your
home
kids,
ownership.
that's when you wanna make your house your home, and that's when, the
Yeah.
having those memories and being able to have the comfort of having everybody in the same place, like, it's really valuable, and sometimes that's priceless and worth paying, a little bit more. But to your point, you have a low, I would assume, a low fixed rate interest rate on your home while you're building equity that's allowing that, cost to basically be covered by the difference between what you'd be renting. So it's there's so many things to take into consideration, not just, to your point, what's cheaper. It's kind of what's cheaper and what's better for you that gives you the lifestyle that you really want to live, and that gives you the ability to make the best financial decisions to help you grow your wealth and grow your income, while you're also enjoying where you live for the time being.
I would just encourage people to think about it long term. Are you running just for the short term, just to, get your ducks in the row, or you're a college student, or you're newly married and you're trying to figure things out? Or are you planning to be a renter for life? And think about that before you do plan on being a renter for life. What are the pros and cons to that? And do know that many people have trials and tribulations throughout their life, and they end up relying on their equity in their home. So if you don't have that, what other ways are you investing? You have to force investing somewhere, or else you might be working for a very long time, and that's not always the goal. That's why we do these, right? So people can invest their money and retire and have financial freedom and not have to work for every dollar and have more peace of mind. But thank you so much, Anna Kelly. I think this is wonderful. I hope Michael likes it too, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye.